Then, we've had a conversation there about resource, and very often these decisions become very resource driven because of the pressures, I think, that are on local authorities and other agencies. The evidence we've heard thus far in committee from people like the Children's Commissioner is that actually we need to, I think, refocus this and look with a human rights lens, because, there are serious concerns, I think, about the dignity. John, you spoke about dignity and respect in your opening statement, and I think the lack of dignity and respect very often for many people who are seeking this support. I referenced in a previous question, those high-profile cases of people being inadequately housed or housed in very inappropriate settings, challenges, I think, in terms of people being left destitute. So I wonder if you would reflect, do you think that you do take a human rights approach in Mears, for example, and what more do you think you could do within your contracts to actually achieve that dignity and respect that you spoke about?
I think we do. With the independent surveys of residents, the feedback is very positive in terms of how they feel they're treated by our staff and the property we provide to them. There is a difficulty in getting enough property, so we aren't happy that we have to house people in hotels. I think that's the single biggest challenge to us, that when we started this contract, no one was living in hotels. At the beginning of the COVID period, we didn't operate hotels. Because of COVID and the cessation of decisions, the system became locked, if you like, and that's where the use of hotels became a main issue. So making a hotel a good place to live is very challenging. Our staff are on site 5 days a week. We have a 7 days a week service. We have some welfare support officers. We work very closely with the asylum health bridging team from the NHS to make sure the support's on site. But no one would say that a hotel is where people would ideally be housed for any period of time. So I'd say that's the biggest single challenge. In our dispersed accommodation, I would say that the accommodation, we have clear contractual standards and they are constantly checked by the Home Office. They have compliance teams that visit. We are very transparent about the service we provide, the number of repairs we do, and the visits we do to every property to try and make sure the properties are well maintained and looked after, and that people are supported whilst they're in the system in the dispersed accommodation. And obviously, as we look to wide dispersal, as Caroline indicated, we need to make sure that if we take properties on in Perth and Aberdeen, Dundee, that we are able to provide that service to support them whilst they're in the dispersed accommodation waiting for the decision on their asylum application. And the quicker those decisions are made, the better. So I would say, we are transparent. We welcome people to come and see our properties. We're not, we're quite clear in the dispersed accommodation. Our staff behave and I think produce a good quality service where we look to put the interests of the service user at the heart of what we do. The hotels, I say, are a very challenging place to be living. If you're living in a hotel for 3 weeks, I think that's one thing. If you're living there for months, then it becomes a very difficult place to be. We try and make sure families aren't in hotels for long periods of time because it's clearly not a right place for a child to be living. So we do try and make sure that we manage that as best we can. And until we can get that wide dispersal moving and get the large volume of accommodation that's needed to make sure that we can end the use of hotels. It's not in anyone's interest to maintain hotels for any longer than necessary.
And if I can, Convener, are you cognisant of the criticism, quite frankly, of people like the Children's Commissioner on some of the circumstances in which particularly pregnant women have found themselves, issues around how hotels are managed and supported by Mears, and how do you then react to that criticism and take it on board and make changes? Because I think much of the evidence we have heard thus far has suggested that doesn't always happen, or there's a real feeling that it doesn't always happen. So
it's a very emotional area, this, and I appreciate everyone has their views. We have talked to the Children's Commission on multiple occasions. We did, I think one of the issues he was probably referring to was we established a mother and baby building in Glasgow. That's a use of accommodation that's been used elsewhere in the UK. We have a number of mother and baby buildings in the North East Yorkshire Humber area. They have worked very effectively in terms of supporting single mothers, in terms of them getting that support. We found a building which we agreed with Glasgow City Council was appropriate and would potentially offer that support. So we established it. It was during the COVID period, and the Children's Commissioner was concerned at that building didn't meet the needs of mothers and babies the way it should do. So we took on that board and we ended its use and used that building for something different. So I think we do listen, we do learn, we do things for the best of reasons. That type of unit was very successful elsewhere. It wasn't in this circumstance, so we've ended its use. The feedback we get from the Children's Commissioner and any support group, I talk regularly to the Scottish Refugee Council, feeds into our service, and we're constantly looking to improve our service and change it based on feedback. And that's empirical, objective feedback. We'll always look at what we can do to improve. And I think it is an area with strong opinions, and we try and work on evidence base. And we've invited many people to come to see our properties and come to the hotels to see what they're like, to see what we can do differently. So with the hotels, we talk to the service users about menus. We change the menus regularly. We try and make sure that the dietary requirements are taken into account and that people's views are taken into account. So nothing is perfect, but we do listen, we do and evolve our services, and we do change our services to try and meet the pressures and the criticisms that may get made. So I genuinely think our staff are committed to that. Certainly everything I've seen in terms of my time in visiting the buildings, visiting properties and talking with staff and reviewing our services and the feedback we get, we indicate that is at the heart of what we do.